Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 2023 Global DEI Conference, a transformative platform for diversity, equity, and inclusion, presented by Ludo and powered by One Business World. Thank you for joining us for this dynamic convergence of global thought leaders and change makers as we foster equity and shape the future together. Joining us now for our next segment from Los Angeles is Patrick Driscoll. He's the general partner of Chasing Rainbows. And his topic here is diversity as a superpower, embracing what makes you different for business success. Good afternoon, Patrick. Thank you for contributing to our conference.
Thank you, Glenn. It's my pleasure to be here. And thanks so much for the opportunity. I will jump right in. Let's get it started. So I'm here to talk a little bit about how to lean into your diversity as a superpower. Before I do that, why am I diverse? Why am I chatting about this? So my name is Patrick Driscoll. I'm the general partner for Chasing Rainbows. It's an LGBTQ plus focused venture capital fund. We invest into early LGBTQ plus founded companies. I've been working with VC firms and funds and accelerators for quite a while, including 500 startups, BMNT. I've worked with DoD accelerators. I used to run Unity and Inclusion Summits for 500 Global as well in New York and in Miami and a couple other spots. So this topic is near and dear to my heart. And I personally have leveraged my LGBTQ plus identity to further my professional trajectory and my professional career in many ways in order to get this fund off the ground. And I love talking about it. So I am a firm believer that what makes us different, what makes us diverse is actually our superpower. And this is especially true when you get into team dynamics and how diverse perspectives lead to outsized returns and outsized outcomes for well-run diverse organizations and startups and teams in general. So setting the stage, just getting some data out there. So right now in the US, women constitute 50% of the US workforce. Hispanic population is 17%, 12% for Black workers, and then 6% for Asian workers. I just want to throw these numbers here to showcase the demographic breakdown of what the US currently looks like. I believe this is from 2020 for the US Bureau of Labor Statistics. However, in terms of startups, I'm going to do this mostly from the perspective of startup funding, early stage startups specifically. So even though those numbers look the way they do, there's still a huge funding disparity for female founders, Black founders, Latinx founders, and LGBTQ plus founders. 77% of venture funding goes to cisgendered white heterosexual males, for example, and then female founders only get 10%. And you can see these numbers as well, which are quite abysmal. And the problem does start at the top in terms of the investors and the investment decision makers. So 58% are cisgendered white heterosexual males, which is better than the founder percentage. And we have seen some growth in terms of female founders up to 22%, Black and Latinx investors, 8% and 8%, and then LGBTQ plus investors are kind of unknown because this is a demographic piece that we don't collect. And these are three factors that influence investor bias. So McKinsey actually came up with these conclusions. Affinity, so a founder's affinity influences the willingness to invest. So is an investor able to relate to the founder? And oftentimes if you have white, cisgendered, heterosexual men making an investment decision, they're going to have an affinity towards other white, cisgendered, heterosexual founders. Demographics, this kind of carries over into this aspect. A founder's gender or ethnic background, if it matches that of the investor, there's a much higher likelihood of receiving capital. And then whiteness, there's a huge correlation between having one co-founder being white to unlocking capital for that founding team, which is just an unfortunate truth. And then some existing barriers for underrepresented founders. So these are the four that McKinsey kind of identified with access, biases. There's a lack of blueprint. So there's limited established blueprint for success for folks to look up to, for example, and then a lack of support, which is something I'm going to talk a lot about. And then here's some recommendations from that report to help get to the root of these problems. So one, intentionally hire and promote women and BIPOC individuals as investors. So start at the top, and then ideally capital will trickle down into founders to increase the number of dollars going to diverse groups. Number two, increase the flow of cash and capital investments that benefit women and BIPOC founders and investors. Three, deploy networks, industry knowledge, and customer relationships that benefit women and BIPOC founders and investors, which is something, again, I'm going to talk about. And then develop and transparently track standardized DEI metrics to drive accountability, to be able to measure this, to see if there's any sort of impact happening when this money trickles down from diverse investors into founders, et cetera. And that way we can hold ourselves accountable. And the use case I'm about to talk about gets into this in an interesting way. So all of this looks kind of abysmal in terms of the amount of money, but what if we flip the narrative, right? So we could all kind of roll over, be sad, say, what can we do? Let's just hopefully push some programs. But what if we actually lean into these diversity components of our being and our identity to our advantage? And the case study that I want to use as a member of the LGBTQ plus community is something that I talk a lot about with my VC fund, is LGBTQ plus founders. So the challenge, again, getting to the sad numbers, 0.5% of VC funding is allocated to founders. 75% of VC founders actually conceal sexual orientation. They either scrub their social media, or they will say that their same-sex partner, same-sex spouse is actually of a different gender than they actually are, so that they're normalized in the eyes of investors. 33% of LGBTQ plus employees have left jobs due to experiencing discrimination, which is a huge number for folks to have to go through. So these are just some disturbing numbers that set the stage for the founder community and the LGBTQ plus community. However, LGBTQ plus unicorns are everywhere. Oops, there is actually a missing slide here. So this exists, these numbers, which kind of paint the negative portrait. However, LGBTQ plus founders outperform. And I can say these numbers in my sleep at this point, so I don't need a slide. So 36% of LGBTQ plus founders create 36% more jobs than their peers. They have 44% more exits than their peers, and they file 114% more patents than their peers. So obviously there's an outperforming component here in comparison, and there's some sort of attribute that ties the LGBTQ plus community to overperforming and outperforming the general market. And then to double click on this, LGBTQ plus led unicorns are everywhere. A lot of these companies you'll recognize, they've had LGBTQ plus founders or LGBTQ plus leaders at the helm, and they're billion-dollar companies, world-changing companies, and they've many of them shifted the culture and how we actually interact with one another on a day-to-day basis. So LGBTQ plus people are doing wonderful things. So how can LGBTQ plus founders leverage their identity? So the thing that I want to drive home in this presentation is helping each other through creating an ecosystem that doesn't exist. So the LGBTQ plus community about 10 plus years ago noticed this disparity in terms of funding, access to education, access to talent, and created several institutions like Start Out, Reaching Out MBA, Out in Tech, Lesbians Who Tech, Trans Tech Social, the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, etc., in order to open up doors and allow access to different opportunities for the queer founder and business operator entrepreneurship community. Additionally, as I mentioned before, a lot of the problems start at the top with the lack of investors. So LGBTQ plus leaders created funds like mine, Chasing Rainbows, Gain Jewels, Colorful Capital, and Pride Fund in order to allocate capital to LGBTQ plus founders, driving money into them so that they could prove this statistic that they outperform in terms of job creation, exits, patents filed, etc., so that more investors will be interested in investing into LGBTQ plus founders going forward. So just some numbers that these have really allowed my fund to be successful. So our 4 parents, Start Out, Out in Tech, Lesbians Who Tech, and Reaching Out MBA specifically, there's now a large amount of potential founders and pipeline for us to access that have been vetted. They've had access to education. They've been chatting with angel investors through these networks. And when you combine them all, it's 182,000 folks that are now positioned to become founders and start businesses from the LGBTQ plus ecosystem. And these things didn't exist, before 2009 and then 2004 for Reaching Out MBA. And just another interesting statistic that I like to point out is that there is an increasing and growing LGBTQ plus population in the US with 19.7% with Gen Z. So it's going to be easier for these numbers to continue to grow into the future. Here we go. Here's a slide that should have been farther up. So the 114% more patents, 36% more job, and 44% more exits, as I mentioned earlier. So that's the LGBTQ plus use case. So leaning into the LGBTQ plus identity and starting these ecosystems, whereas no one was helping the LGBTQ plus community before, really empowered us to be successful or more successful than we were in the past. There's still a big disconnect in terms of funding disparity towards LGBTQ plus founders and the actual percentage of LGBTQ plus folks in the general population. But that's something that we hope to address with the continuation of these programs and institutions and organizations. So now getting into other groups, I want to kind of paint the portrait of what these ecosystems look like for other underrepresented groups. So for women, for example, they face problems in access to financing, business ownership rates, and industry concentration. It's very highly concentrated in specific industries. And the solution really is, it's going to be similar for all of the groups I'm about to cover, is supporting entrepreneurs from these demographics through mentorship networking, and access to capital, which is going to ideally push the numbers up towards the actual split. Women make up 50% of the general population, more or less, or 51%. So how can we close the gap between that number and the percentage of women getting access to capital in the founder community? So this is just a small little slice of the ecosystem for female founders. All Raise is a great organization that helps female capital allocators get access to education and network. Lesbians Who Tech, which is specifically for LB and Q folks in the LGBTQ plus community. Even Latinas in Tech, Black Women Tech Talk, Female VC Lab, Women's Business Development Centers. So these are all great ecosystem builders for female founders, female entrepreneurs to get access to the network that's going to unlock capital and unlock success and opportunity for them. In addition, there are several VC funds that focus in female founders, like Backstage, Female Founders Fund, Artemis used to be here. There we go, Artemis Fund, Female Founder F3, Fearless, which is pretty top of mind right now, Emmeline Ventures. So these are some of my favorite VC funds, but there are so many that focus on female founders. And then one thing that I'll say as well is I spoke last night with an investor, just anecdotally, who has a daughter, considers himself a girl dad, and he has specifically shifted his personal angel investment thesis to only invest into female founders because he wants to see a world where his daughter can grow up and be surrounded by pretty badass female leaders. And that's an interesting perspective when you think about getting allies to come in to invest into these underrepresented groups. Founders of color. So again, similar problems, lower rates of business ownership, less access to startup capital, higher denial rates for loans, solely based on race, even if it's a completely, if it's the same application for a founder of color or an entrepreneur of color and a white entrepreneur, oftentimes the entrepreneur who's white will get the loan versus someone who's of color, which is a very frustrating aspect of the financial industry. And again, targeted support and resources are needed to increase increase opportunity to Black business and ownership and success. So here's some ecosystem builders for BIPOC founders and Black founders. So Minority Business Development Agency, Black Business Association, Hillman. There are accelerators like Northwestern Mutual Black Founder Accelerator. And then in terms of investors and VC capital allocators, we have Black VC, Kapoor Capital, Harlem Capital. There are a ton of specific initiatives within larger financial institutions that target the Black community and the BIPOC community at a larger scale. So I definitely recommend folks check into those initiatives. I know Silicon Valley Bank, JP Morgan, Amazon, they all have initiatives that focus in this general population. And typically these initiatives have been led and launched and propagated by members of the BIPOC and Black community. So again, it's that idea that community will help itself if there is a lack of opportunity, which is, I think, a great catalyst for shifting the narrative here. And then I want to get into, everyone always thinks about demographics in terms of LGBTQ plus, well, not necessarily LGBTQ plus, first gender, then ethnicity and race, LGBTQ plus, but folks oftentimes overlook other groups or identities. And I'm including veterans here because I love some of the veterans focused funds and I'm close with some of them. And I used to do work with the Department of Defense and the VA, and veterans face similar issues. So access to capital, mentorship programs, and then they have access to, they actually have a leg up in terms of government contracting, which is something in their to their advantage. But if you lean into your veteran identity like you would for myself, for example, into my LGBTQ plus identity, there's ways to unlock opportunity. And here's an ecosystem that's even been created for veteran founders. So there's an organization literally called Veteran, the Veteran Startup Challenge. There's a Veteran Crowd. There are VC funds like Bunker Labs, which is a great VC firm that I know quite well. Veteran Fund. There are certifications as well to get you access to government contracts. There are a lot of things that you could lean into and leverage to your advantage if you even take things like your veteran status, for example, and lean into that diverse aspect of your being. The final kind of group of people that I'll focus on are immigrants. So I think I read somewhere that more than 50% of billion-dollar companies in the US were founded by immigrants. So there's a fascinating level of statistics of success there, which people oftentimes forget. And immigrants, like the other groups that I mentioned, do have affinity groups. They suffer still with access to capital, despite these amazing statistics around billion-dollar companies. And then business statistics, it's a fast-growing segment within the small business community, and it's actually making an outsized impact on economic contributions in local communities specifically. And then there are things, just again, what I did with the other groups. Founders Network is a great immigrant-focused kind of ecosystem builder. We have Geek Ventures. Unshackled is a really great VC firm. Unshackled Ventures, and we have One Way. So even for this segment of diversity, there are ecosystem builders and powers that be that are working to empower it. So what does this all kind of like boil down to? One is leaning into your community, leaning into your diversity as your superpower. And you could do this in several ways, right? Joining local business groups. There are chambers of commerce that relate to a lot of these demographic groups. For example, there are business groups that focus on veterans, on immigrants, on neurodivergent groups, et cetera, et cetera. You should follow leaders in your industry. Part of what I did to make my career as successful as it's been thus far is look for mentors and get mentors that were also LGBTQ plus venture capitalists or involved in the tech industry. Sponsor community events, put together a group of folks for your diverse identity, right? So I do a lot of LGBTQ plus focused startup and investor events. I've been a member of Startup as a board member for quite a while, and that's been immensely helpful for my own success. Additionally, when you're growing your business or your firm, hire diverse team members and then partner with diverse suppliers. So actually walk the walk as opposed to talk the talk. And when you look at hiring practices, diverse teams and diverse founders typically will hire diverse employees. And then the final thing that I'll harken on is the business case for diversity, which there are so many studies, which the last kind of slide will cover. But the key points that I want to focus on here is DEI actually improves financial performance. It improves company culture and employment engagement, and it meets customer and market demands at a better scale because the market is diverse inherently, right? So having a diverse team is going to be able to address some of those problems that otherwise monogamous, excuse me, what is the word I'm looking for? Teams that look the same typically aren't able to address. And then again, just double clicking on these: improved financial performance, increased innovation, improved talent recruitment and retention, stronger corporate reputation. You can brag about your diversity, and then better decision making. And then just some numbers that I love. So McKinsey and Company always comes out with this great report. The most recent one I could access was 2019 or 2020, excuse me. So gender and ethnic diversity in leadership teams has progressed to 2019 and increased, and you can see that in kind of both of these for gender and ethnic minorities. And what does this mean for financial outperformance? So gender diverse teams outperform, up to 25%, and ethnically diverse teams outperform up to 36%. So this is a pretty staggering statistic when you look at the general market performance. And folks are always thinking that, these studies are done by affinity groups or groups that only care about that small subset of diversity. But all of these organizations, which most of you should recognize, or many of you will recognize, have come out with studies that prove that diverse teams and investing into diverse founders, investing into diverse investors will lead to outsized financial returns. And Fast Company, McKinsey, Allraise, Harvard Business Review, Forbes, World Economic Forum, Neuro Leadership Institute, these are global leaders in creating white and thought leaders in a variety of institutions. And if they're all saying it, I always ask the question, why hasn't capital shifted to actually address a lot of the findings here? And it's just a slow, behemoth, bureaucratic beast to change. And just some quotes for some of these studies: diverse teams compel each other to think more deeply about reasoning and interrogate the facts more objectively. 75% of organizations with decision-making teams reflecting a diverse culture will exceed their financial targets. And then research shows that companies with above average diversity scores drive 45% average revenue from innovation, while companies with below average diversity scores drive only 26%. And these are just a few very small amount of quotes. So yeah, diverse teams are winning. And I think we just have to continue to lean into diversity as a superpower, and leaning into your own specific either group in order to unlock a lot of opportunity for yourself, for your business, and for the general community. And that's my presentation.
Thank you, Patrick. Great job. Great job. Really, a lot to take in, a lot of data, a lot of statistics there. As you go through, I mean, you talk about millennials and Gen Z. That you quick piece of the math. That's already 30%, right?
Yep.
As you look at groups and the like, and as you said, you kind of start with your own difference. Becomes you work with the team, you work with an organization, and then you work with a community, and before you know it, it continues to kind of work its way into that community. And groups like the chambers, those are always very powerful local organizations. And the more people work on shaping culture and engagement, I mean, companies are always looking for show me the results, show me the and you're building those results, where again you're kind of meeting from an engagement standpoint, you're meeting your customers where they are, right, and who they are. And at that point, as you work through the various groups you talked about, women, color, veterans, immigrants, LGBTQ, I mean, all of it, just as it continues to shift, it just, sometimes it's baby steps, right? And everybody, to use an old phrase, tape recorder, you want to hit fast forward, but that's not always going to happen. And it's just, as you continue to build that momentum, you would think it'd be awful hard to ignore those types of results as they come out, with the success of some of the companies you had up on the screen, with those that are leaders or founders of those companies. These are proven, as you said, proven winners for sure. So keeping that open mind and leaning into people's differences to kind of develop a better, more holistic world for all of us certainly sounds worthwhile, and sounds memorable for those that are participating. And then really, when you think about the companies and the organizations, it's going to be a successful outcome at the end of the day. You know, when you talk about, it's interesting, you mentioned the veterans. We when I was at the New York Stock Exchange, we had a really tremendous program one year. We did like veteran internships. This was for those coming back from the Persian Gulf, and we worked with people of all shapes and sizes and ages, and kind of help them with their resumes and help have them work with us at the exchange, help find them other jobs. And it was so rewarding because you met people of just different mindsets and different skills and backgrounds. And it's like, yeah, why can't you work in business, right? Why not? Why not? As you go through. How about on the banking side? You know, when you think about because you had the one group with the denial of loans and stuff, and that's always troubling. How about on the banking side? Yeah, any collective thoughts on that as to
Yeah.
those being receptive and working through it? Because people often, the first stop is your local bank, right? When you're thinking
Yeah,
about funding, or hey, I'm starting a business, checking account, whatever it is, you think of
for
financial.
sure. There's been interesting studies on, I mean, a ton of neobanks popped up between 2019 and 2022, probably in the tech sector that were specifically targeting underrepresented groups. There was an LGBTQ plus neobank, for example. Those have, for the most part, fallen by the wayside for kind of a lack of interest. And the reason why I think several of them have fallen by the wayside is financial institutions are doing better in getting over these biases, or even allocating kind of proactively points towards underrepresented business owners looking for access to loans. That's a huge generalized statement. There's, I know, a huge issue with Black run banks. I think the number of Black run or Black led banks has significantly decreased over the past 10-15 years, which is pretty sad for Black business owners and folks looking to get a mortgage or buy a home or anything like that. So there are still barriers that exist, but ideally there's like also blind reviews of applications, which try to eliminate biased perspectives of even the names of folks applying can lead to some reviewer or somebody doing underwriting saying no to an application because they perceive the name to be a different either race or ethnicity or immigrant status. So there are several, I think, tools that are being implemented that try to address these issues.
I remember there was a story or a study about populating an orchestra, and those in the know obviously know where first violin is or first tuba and all those types of things. And the auditions themselves were behind the curtain, so you didn't see what the people look like. All you did was listen to the sounds, and then they called out the spots, and then it was like, oh, okay, you're a first violin, wow. And and there was your diversity. But I mean, you talk about more jobs, more exits, more patents from the entrepreneurial standpoint and the startup. That's impressive. That's impressive. And that, as we continue to move forward and continue to try to sometimes, turn the Queen Mary in the harbor, which takes a little while. Those are compelling statistics, and going to be hard for people to come back and say, yeah, but, and kind of pushing that door down, right? One person at a time sometimes, but just some great work here for sure. And people overcoming their challenges, as you mentioned as well. It starts with one person and continues forward into the community for sure. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us. Great job. Congratulations on all your wonderful work here with Chasing Rainbows and for advancing the good here in society. And we really appreciate your contributions here to the conference.
Absolutely. Yeah, pleasure to be here. And thanks so much for the invitation.
Have a good rest of your day. Thank you, Patrick.
For sure.
Bye.